is the Sandwich Generation Survival Guide, caring for your children, your parents, and yourself with your hosts, me, Candace Delacona, and Jodi Argentino.
And today we have episode number 2, Survival of the Fittest, caring for yourself to care for your family. So Candace, this is the episode where we get to talk about the proverbial oxygen mask concept.
I love
it. I know. And it's, I actually hate it when people say it, like, oh, make sure you have your oxygen mask. I'm like, yeah. Also on an airplane, who listens to that? But it really is a concept that we have to embrace, particularly as a sandwich generation.
I mean, for sure, right? So in bringing this podcast to our listeners, one of the things that we're going to be talking about often is caring for everyone else in your life. But, with the old adage from flying in an airplane, you have to put your oxygen mask on yourself before you can help other people. So today is our opportunity to talk about ourselves and self-care and what that means.
So I think you had looked up what the World Health Organization says about self-care.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. Like, first of all, for all of our listeners out there, many of you are probably women, and we are sitting here as 2 women. And I think that there can be a connotation that self-care is considered selfish. It's self-indulgent, right?
And you know what? If we're talking about what has been what's that word?
Commoditized?
Thank you. If we're talking about what has been commoditized in self-care, in bubbles and bath bombs and massages and my green juice and all of that, then that's, I think, where that concept comes from. But if we look at like the real concept of self-care, it's not that. It's a much more basic level, right?
Yeah, it's definitely not skin deep either, right? It's not about beauty treatments and having a manicure. I think it's a really important and vital topic. And I think that there is a lot of sort of miscommunication and a misnomer in many ways, because the self-care is sort of a connotation of being self-involved, and it's actually quite the opposite. In order to make sure that you're well taking care of yourself, it's so that you can help other people. It's entirely a different meaning. And you referenced the World Health Organization. I think it's really interesting that the largest health organization in the world even defines care or for oneself as the ability to help individuals and families and communities to promote health, prevent disease, maintain one's health, and to cope. And this can have sort of a meaning with the healthcare professional or without. And that's what we want to talk about today.
Right. I was actually one of my self-care things is I use an app called Shimmer, and it is an ADHD coach app. And it's just really a cool thing. She checks in with me, she helps me, but she gave me this book called The Real Self-Care, Bubble Baths, Cleanses, and Crystals Not Included. It's by Dr. Pooja Lakshman, and it's a new book. It just came out a month or 2 ago, and I love it because I'm only halfway through it. So shout out to you, good doctor, because she's a psychiatrist and she works in women's mental health. And, she talks about the difference between faux self-care, right? Which is our juice cleanses, our fad diets, our weekends away, anything that's advertised to us as how to fix the stress, right? Rather than getting to the root cause of it and preventing it to begin with. And she talks about the different times in your life, how certain things that work for you at different times don't work at other times, which I found really, really interesting. And one of the things, like, you can't like meditate, or you can't like use an app to get yourself to work your way through your work week with no childcare, without health insurance, right? Like you need all of those pieces. And then you have these self-soothing things that may help you get through the bumps, right?
Yeah.
But that's not the essence of self-care.
Yeah. Well, I think it's really important to talk about what that means and how it probably looks quite different for every one of our listeners. And at every point in their lives. So what self-care may mean in the spring of 2023 may not have any resemblance of what it looks like in winter of 2024.
Yeah, absolutely.
As
Or
humans,
2020, right? Like
yeah, I mean,
self-care
that's
during COVID was a completely different animal than self-care post-COVID or pre-COVID.
so true. And it really, in many ways, COVID brought to light, I think, the importance of self-care for all of us, because we were all similarly faced with a crisis of health, some of us financial, and concern for both of those things, even if you weren't in the midst of it.
Right.
And because we are humans and because nothing is permanent, I think it's important to constantly reevaluate the ways in which you are attending to your own self-care and how that can evolve as time progresses and as people around you, their needs change and therefore your needs change. So why don't we talk about sort of the different methods of self-care for our audience?
I think that's a great idea.
Okay.
All right. So Candace has graciously put together 5 methods of self-care, like 5 categories, right, of self-care, which is physical, social, mental, emotional, spiritual, and financial. And I think we'll leave the financial one to last because that for me is the most triggery and the hardest one. So let's just put that way at the end.
Yeah.
So when we talk about physical self-care, um, are we talking about whether or not you're on this, whether or not you are taking a new shot, or whether you're taking like that new weight loss shot, or whether you're getting a I don't know, or your mammogram every year? Like what are we talking about with physical well-being, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the physical method of self-care is probably the most evident to people, right? Where it's sort of like tasks that you can check off on your list, right? So, all of the research that we've done, the number one way for physically caring for yourself is making sure that you get enough sleep.
Wow.
And I really think that that can't be overstated too much, right? Because if you don't have proper sleep, then you can't do anything else right. Your
Right.
level of concentration is diminished, irritability, ability to just focus and perform simple tasks. So, get some sleep, right? Set the alarm, make yourself get into bed, stop scrolling through TikTok, and really try to get a requisite number of hours that seem to leave you well rested, or well rested enough, we
Yeah,
should
I
say,
think mine
right?
would be like, ultimately it'd be 12 hours a night in order for me to be well rested. But if I can get 7, like I'm all right.
Yeah, no, I think that's good. I mean, the other thing, obviously, after sleep is diet. And I'm not talking about losing weight diet. I'm talking about, are you filling your body with foods that will fuel you? Talk about leafy greens and vitamins and all of those fun things that we learned about in the now very outdated food pyramid. Um,
Right. But and making sure you're eating multiple times a day, right? Because I know, like for me, yes, I tend to stress eat. Right. I'm an emotional eater, working on that. But also, like, if you're at a desk or you're in court or whatever your job is that you're doing and you're super busy all day long, it's really easy to forget lunch, right? And just like I used to hear people say, "Oh, I forgot to eat," and I was like, who forgets to eat? Like that is not in my Italian upbringing. Like every meal's an 8-course meal. We don't forget nothing. But 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 now I actually understand that, right? Because like 2 kids going this way, 1 kid going to practice, trying to get this brief done, whatever it is, you forget to eat. And
yeah, and
it's
maybe when you do eat,
crazy.
you're eating the wrong things that are not
Right,
making you feel great, right?
right.
So
Like
I
your
think
kids'
that
leftovers.
that's right. Or instead of having a meal and some protein, uh, you're having processed food, which doesn't make any of us feel good.
Right.
So I think that that's a really important point. And then, it sort of leads to maintenance as it comes to the physical. And what does that mean? I mean, seeing your doctors.
Right.
Most of us are very lucky and we have good health insurance. And if you are one of those lucky people that do, it's so important to keep up with those doctor's appointments and those annual physicals that will really help you with your preventative care and making sure that you're never at a point where you're having to cure a disease, where you're in a position where you can stop them from happening to the extent that you have that control. And I think seeing a
Yeah,
doctor and making that a priority is so important, isn't it, Jodi?
it really is. And even actually some healthcare plans now are have an element to their service that is preventative, right? Or that is I'm going to say restorative, or that is
And a reward, actually,
right,
right?
and a reward. Like we have one that if you get a physical every year and fill out some forms, you get like a discount every month on your health insurance, which is great. I mean, like I'm like, oh, I won't do it for myself, but I'll do it for $50 a month. I don't understand that. But you would think I'd want to do the physical for my own health.
Well,
That's we have sometimes we need those motivators.
yeah, I mean, but let's talk about it in the context of a sandwich generation. When my kids have their annual checkups, I can count on one hand the number of times that I've rescheduled or canceled because those appointments are important. But for myself, I am positive that I have rescheduled and canceled multiple appointments, whether it's the dentist or my cardiologist or my primary care doctor. Shout out to Dr. Ehrman, who just sent me an email and said, "You are due for your physical." And he's right. And I wouldn't do that to my kids. I wouldn't put their
Right,
physicals off. Why am I doing it for me?
right.
It's so important to keep up with those doctor's appointments.
Yeah, I'm terrible with the mammograms.
Yeah,
I'm
well,
like,
they're the
no, who
worst.
wants to do that, right?
It's true,
But
but we
but
have to.
we have to. And we have to not just for ourselves, right? And that's the weird part about talking about self-care is we're talking about self-care. It's sort of screwy, right? We're talking about self-care so that you can help other people. So it's even
And we're back.
if you think about it, right? Like in that, it's really ass backwards because we're like, oh yes, we have to do all these things for ourselves so that we are ready and capable to care for somebody else.
But you know what?
Um,
If that encourages us to do what we're supposed to do
yeah,
for ourselves, then so be it. Unfortunately for me, it doesn't help me get on the treadmill because the other category, of course, is exercise. With eating right and getting enough sleep and going to the doctor, we have to make sure to move our bodies. And whatever that looks like for you is probably different than what it looks like for me. But to the extent that you're able to exercise, it's really important to stay active. That's a big part of a physical well-being. Obviously, we all know the effects of exercise, endorphins, and it makes you feel good. And, you can feel more confident if you're in tip-top shape and you can walk up a set of stairs without feeling like you've run a marathon.
right. And it's not about what size you are or how much you can lift or whether you've logged enough steps that day, right? And that's, I think, something we get caught up in is tracking. Like everything has to be on social media. Oh, I'm at the gym, selfie. Like, why does everybody else need to know I'm at the gym? Like, I'm at the
Yeah.
gym for what purpose? Well, I'm never
Yeah.
at the gym, so I don't even know why I use that. But exercise doesn't look the same, or moving your body doesn't look the same for everyone. If I do a restorative yoga at home on my computer, like that's my exercise. If I take the
Absolutely.
dog for a walk, that's my exercise. I am not running any marathons, and I haven't seen a treadmill in years.
Well, I
So,
want to play
you know,
devil's advocate with the social media piece, right? Because I have a lot of friends who are dedicated to their workouts and they record them to hold themselves accountable.
yeah,
So,
that's
that's the
true.
flip side, right?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
what's funny is I actually have a few friends, Facebook friends, and I am like, oh, yeah, they're doing great today. So it is, sometimes we do need that external, like,
Pressure,
pressure,
peer
help,
pressure.
yeah,
Yeah.
peer pressure,
Yeah. Yeah.
which actually is a great segue to number 2 on the self-care list, which is social self-care. What the heck is social self-care?
Yeah, I mean, I think social self-care is my favorite part, and it's definitely when I think about self-care and what makes me feel good, it's the social component. It's, really sort of making sure that my connection with my husband and my friends, that those connections are good. They're precious to me, they're restorative, and I do think it's super important for a self-care method that you think about those relationships and you put the time and work on the relationships that are important to you and maybe restorative for you. And that can look
Yeah.
different for everyone, right, Jody?
Yeah, I actually have myself a note for this because it's, maintaining your own independence, right? And not just relying on just your family or just your partner or just your partner's friends or just the group friends, but really making sure that you have your own space because everybody needs their own space to be able to grow and stay an individual. And the other piece I was thinking of with social is, yeah, what you were saying is not neglecting those relationships, right? Which may mean not avoiding issues that come up. Like as I'm conflict avoidant. Yes, I'm a litigator. People never understand it. I can litigate for other people all day long, but personally, I avoid conflict. And that's really hard because every single relationship is going to have some conflict in it. And
Yeah.
we have to actually deal with that with our friends and everything. And like
Yeah.
I have a poly family, right? So we have to constantly be talking about how our interactions are, whether we need space, um, who's going out with whose friends, et cetera, because it's essential to have that level of open communication. And when you don't, it breaks down. And
Yeah.
that's
And,
hard.
I think you're right. I think while working on the relationships are vital to keep those relationships strong and communicative and sort of knowing what the other party expects from you. But I also think, taking it to the basics, it's literally about blowing off steam and having fun and
Right.
laughing and really sort of being present in the small joys. And, I have a group of girlfriends and we laugh and are silly and have, serious discussions and not serious discussions. And inevitably, no matter how bad my week has been, spending time with these people who are important in my life really can make a difference and can really make me feel better, right? So
Yeah.
talking about self-care and making yourself feel good, you cannot set aside those interpersonal relationships. And the same with your spouse or your partner or your loved one, and checking in with them and making sure that, like you say, Jody, it's all good. And so I think that that's really important. And leads kind of naturally into our sort of third category, right? Which is the emotional mental self-care.
Right. And I'm combining those two because to me they go together because you can't just exist cognitively, right? Because we all come to the world with our own perceptions.
Yeah.
So how do we care for ourselves emotionally and mentally? And so for me, I would be like, with Oprah with the therapy, you get therapy, everybody gets some therapy because I'm such a proponent of having the appropriate type of therapy that works for you. There's so many different types, and that may be a group, that may be individual, that may be this methodology or that methodology, whatever it is for you. Um, that one safe space where you can just express um, and make sure that you are checking in with yourself.
Well, let's talk about that, right? Because we are, again, coming from a place of sort of privilege
Hmm.
and talking about things like therapy. Therapy costs money, and
Does.
therapy means you have access. So, I think what's really important for our listeners to know is that there are ways to have that sort of therapy and that sort of outlet without costing a lot of money. First of all, there are support groups in every community for
Yep.
whatever you're going through. So if you are a listener to the Sandwich Generation Survival Guide, you may be providing care to a loved one. There are support groups for caregivers that you can attend on a weekly basis, sometimes even more often, where you can vent and complain and ask for help and tips. Oftentimes, these groups, while they're free, they're led by real mental health professionals who can provide you with really good and solid guidance and advice. if
Right.
and then, as you were saying, like if we're lucky enough to have insurance and you have the ability to see a therapist, it's important that you find a therapist who really has expertise and a background in what you're looking to fix about yourself or to heal about yourself.
Right. We don't spend enough time healing the things that need to be healed within us. And then if we don't spend that time, then it trickles down into the rest of everything around us and the people around us. But what you were saying about community like support groups, there's also, if you have, there's PFLAG for any LGBTQ issues. There's Planned Parenthood has a community support group. So there's so many different types of support groups out there that are community based. But therapy also can be, there's online options, right? Like maybe it's joining a Facebook group of similarly situated people, right? That just provides that network of like to hold you, right? Or to validate your feelings.
I think you're onto something. I mean, I think one of the mediums that we're using right now is a podcast, right? Which is like imparting information to people. There are podcasts for mental health. There are apps now, BetterHelp
Yep.
Health or BetterHelp is one of them. Talkspace is another. So I think that we'll definitely do our best for our listeners to put together a list of resources. And, feel free to reach out to us on our Facebook page if you're looking for a particular support group. And that's definitely something that we can look into for you. So I really do agree with you that, Jodi, the best way we can sort of make our way through our lives in self-care is the support. But I think in part of the mental, emotional category, we talk about the sandwich generation, and one of the things we're acutely aware of is aging. And so, how are we taking care of I know, well,
I don't
how
really
are
like
we
to
taking
talk about
care of
that,
our
Candace.
brains, though, when it comes to making sure that you're doing some mental self-care? Are you doing things and taking part in activities that keep your mind sharp, right?
Like Scrabble? Like what are we talking?
Sure. Scrabble, we're talking puzzles. What about a book club? And continuing to learn. Have a cousin who lives here in Manhattan, and she retired recently. And she's brilliant and loves life. And one of the things that I shared with her is that if you're in a particular zip code in New York City, you can go to Columbia University as a student to audit classes. Many communities have universities and colleges, even community colleges that allow for continuing education, for example.
Hmm, that's neat. And it doesn't mean we have to run out and get a new master's degree. Or, well, I did that, but or like join the 52 books a year club, or have the top score on Words with Friends, right? It's just about finding something that speaks to you, giving yourself those, I'm going to say breaks, right? Giving yourself the breaks from like the mundane in order to make sure that you are still like
Sharp.
yeah, sharp. That's
Yeah.
exactly right. I was
Yeah.
going to say like spurring your intellect or something, like making yourself interesting. That's the other thing, right? You don't want to become stale. And I think sometimes we just go along with life and we just do the things that we're used to doing in routine. And we don't think about the fact that, like, I have to interest myself. I'm
Well,
learning this about myself. Like, I have to be interesting. And if I'm not learning new things and I'm not challenging my brain, then I'm just going through the motions.
I mean, I think what you're talking about is being able to contribute, right? And that
Yeah.
probably dovetails nicely with the social piece where you want to feel like you are contributing to a relationship or a conversation or a knowledge base, and whatever that looks like from you. And really, when it comes to the overall topic of self-care, it's a break from maybe caregiving, from making school lunches,
Yeah.
from paying bills for mom or dad. So, making sure that you yourself are staying sharp so that you can help other people, back to helping other people.
Right.
And what are the healthy methods of that? You have to like really make sure and take stock. Are you coping in healthy ways? Maybe that looks like journaling for someone, really sort of
Right.
capturing their thoughts or feelings. For other people, it could be more dangerous, like having an extra glass of wine at night, in a way that maybe isn't the best decision for you.
Right. And so the focus really needs to be on those healthy coping mechanisms or healthy self-soothing rather than than just the things that help us avoid or make things help us disassociate and not pay attention to those stressors.
Right. Especially
Yeah.
they're only temporary fixes, right? So I
Yeah.
think it is really important to take stock in the ways in which you're emotionally caring for yourself, and doing it in a healthy way. And, to that point, we get into like the spiritual part. And I think that's such an interesting word for so many people, and what that means is so different for everyone, isn't it?
Right, because the second you say spiritual, I automatically have as a member of the LGBTQ community, we have a very interesting relationship with religion, right? And so I automatically get like a stress response when you say spiritual, and working on that because spiritual doesn't necessarily mean one religion or another,
Or
right? It
religion at
just
all.
right or religion at all,
Yeah.
and for me, yeah, I have a personal relationship with the universe, right? And that's spirituality, right? It could be taking that 10 minutes to meditate in the morning just to connect with yourself or connect with the world around you. And so I think it's important, like, through yoga or whatever, like I can find that spirituality, even if I'm not going to, Catholic church on Sunday, which is how I grew up, which I may go to sometimes, but like when I think spirituality, I think more of my connectedness with the universe, but that's not true for everyone. A lot of people find solace in their temple or in their church community. And it's just another level of support.
Absolutely. I mean, I think at the end of the day, your spirituality could be connected to a religion or not at all. Could be connected to nature, as you point out,
Right.
meditation, whatever it is. I think it's really important that if you have that affinity at all, you should give yourself time to explore what that is. And that could be a ritualistic, traditional religious type setting that provides you with the comfort that you're seeking, whether it is the faith in the higher power, or if you are in recovery and you are someone that attends 12-step meetings and the ability to work a program. Whatever that looks like for you is absolutely part of what your self-care routine could look like.
Yeah.
I think that, too, as you point out, Jodi, as someone who is a member of the LGBTQIA population, being respectful of what other people's ideas of spirituality are, and how sometimes it could be triggering to say that you're, a member of one affiliation or not, and just being mindful of that, whether it's within your own family or, through your social emotional connection of a friend. So it's
Right.
definitely something worth considering.
And then the final one we have is financial.
Oof,
Yay.
yeah.
Right. And I think this is the one um that triggers me the most because, I saw my dad work hard and he was the hardest worker I've ever known in my life. But it was always he worked hard and he would just work harder, right? And that's the mentality that I have learned, not the work smarter, not harder, whatever that term is. But so how do we avoid the pitfalls, right, for the sandwich generation? Um, so that we're dealing with the ourselves, the people above us, the people below us, but below us, no, you know what I mean? Younger people, the older people, and those of us in the middle. But how do we manage our own personal stuff?
Well, I mean, I think it's funny that when we say financial, you go automatically to work, right?
Right.
You say financial is synonymous with work. And
Right.
I think you're
Right.
right for some people, but for others, it may not just be work. As an estate planning attorney, as someone who tries to help her clients plan for the future, the unexpected, the death, the disability, all of the things in between, I have plenty of clients when I say, let's go over your assets, and they look at me as if they're a deer in headlights. It's the last thing they want to do. And, I do try to help clients start out simple. And in order to start at ground zero as a sandwich generation person, getting your own house in order, what do? We make a list. What do you have? Maybe the list for some people is quite long if they're lucky, and maybe for others it's pretty short and it might just be a bank account and income.
Right.
But whatever your finances look like, the best thing to do to start is to take an inventory of where you are.
That makes so much sense. And you're right. I didn't even realize that. I'm going to learn a lot about myself through this, Candace. But that is where I automatically go. And that's the thing is everybody approaches these concepts from where they have come from, right? They
Totally.
approach these concepts from their own schema, their own set of glasses that they see the world in. And yeah, apparently I'm going to have to work on that in my emotional upkeep because that is exactly where I go. And so many people avoid estate planning. So
Yeah.
many people just
Yeah.
cannot like embrace the concept that death will happen,
Yeah.
right? And so how do we get past that? So we're like really financially set up for so that we're not leaving our children perhaps in the same place that the other half of our sandwich has left us.
I mean, Jodi, you just said something so true, right? Which is that this is like a triggering topic for so many people. It's something that people want to avoid. I think that in my experience, there are sort of quick and easy things that you can do to set yourself up the right way so that you or your family perhaps don't find yourself in a position of crisis or financial insecurity, particularly if somebody gets sick. And I think one of the things that's really important to do after you make a list and take stock is to really look at the long term. And maybe for you, that means getting a job with a pension upon retirement.
Right.
Or looking for an employer who provides an opportunity to save for retirement in a really cost effective way, like a 401k plan, for example. And I'm sure we're going to go into that on another episode. But, having those sort of funds for a rainy day so that if the unexpected happens sooner than you expect, there is a bit of a protection there, a
Right.
lifesaver, a slush fund, if you will.
So one of the things in matrimonial law that we do all the time is right, almost the first thing that a client, I know clients' lives inside out and backwards. And one of the things that we have them do first is that same list, right? Except unfortunately for the court, at least in New Jersey, it's really complicated. It's like 13 pages. But it really is an inventory of your assets, your debts, and how much you spend on a regular basis and what you spend it on.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is that when most people, I will say in 20 something years, right, most people that come into my office are like, well, I don't know, right? Like and it's not one gender versus another gender, right? Like people really don't have a, for the most part, a good grasp on their finances. I have one client that actually reconciles their books every month. And to me, that's phenomenal because that is not the norm for what I see come in my door on a regular basis.
Yeah, I mean,
And
that's
yeah,
interesting though that your practice does bring that out similar to mine. I do see a correlation between genders in many circumstances because there is a division of labor, right? Especially in the sandwich generation, because everybody can't be doing finances and everybody can't be doing caretaking. So there's sort of a divide and conquer approach with finances. So unfortunately, I do see one of the two partners or spouses having a more solid grasp, let's say, on their debts and their expenses and their finances than perhaps another, just by virtue of survival,
right, right. And
right?
there you go. So the thing is it's okay to divide and conquer, but you have to information share as well. Because if
Yeah.
you're not information sharing, then, I always like to say everything is fine until it's not.
Yeah.
So like,
Yeah.
let's plan for that. And that's, I think, probably like most of your practice, right, Candace? Everything is fine until
Yeah.
it's not.
I mean, it's true. And the other thing is back to sort of the beginning, you can't do everything. You can't know everything. So
Right.
even within a partnership between yourself and your spouse, or yourself and your partner, may still be really necessary for you to bring in a financial advisor or an accountant. And it doesn't mean that you have to have loads of money to do that. There are plenty of nonprofits, and we'll definitely provide you with those resources on our Facebook page and our website, to perhaps point you in the right direction to find an advisor that can help you make a plan for the future. And I think one of the important things about doing that is you're modeling for your kids,
Right.
because you want to pass on that sort of methodology of having an awareness and a good grasp of what you have in terms of finances, so that your kids then follow suit. And each generation, I think, can be more prepared for his or her own self-care, their self-care in the future, when it comes to finances or anything else.
Right. So pass it on. Well,
Pass
thank
it
you.
on.
I'm so excited. This is going to be awesome. And so next week, we will be diving a little bit deeper into these chapters of the survival guide.
Can't wait, Jodi.